But I passed muster, I discovered later, when I had indirect access to my file there. They decided I was an okay person. And in fact, they arranged for me, and this was a big deal then, a meeting with historians in Nanking. This was my first real exposure to Chinese historians. Now, this is a period of time when the Chinese history field was in a terrible disarray, and particularly fields like the study of the Taiping Rebellion, which was taken as a kind of analogy to what was going on in China at that time. Each of the major figures in the Taiping Rebellion were simulacra for Zhou Enlai, Lin Biao, Mao Zedong, and so on. So they were on the hot seat, and they gave me this interview. I told them I was going to take notes, and they agreed to that, in the Taiping History Museum in Nanjing. And I spent a full morning with them, just completely avid, because they were, in a way, revealing the rifts between them and the members of the Cultural Revolutionary group that dominated the universities in Shanghai. And I went on to, I told them I was going to publish this, and I went on and published an English translation of the conversation in a journal called the China Quarterly, which then I thought no more of it. And later, when I went back to China and lived there, one of the figures, a very man who's still very active, very great scholar, told me one time on a trip, he said, you know, I was almost killed for that. Because I addressed him at one point and said, I noticed that there's a distinct difference between your interpretation and the interpretation at Fudan University. Is that true? True. And these four gentlemen looked at each other, you know, rather shiftily. And finally, one of them, the boldest of them, said, sure, yes, it is. And I noted that. Well, I had no idea what this meant in terms of the consequences. The fact that he would acknowledge this kind of rift to an outsider was taken as an act of treachery. And they sent a team from Shanghai to arrest him. Had it not been for the protection of the vice president of his university, he would have been taken off. And I don't know what would have happened to him. He said, well, you know, the canto, I would have had my head cut off, which of course was hyperbole. But it was very, it was a highly politicized atmosphere.
Well, did you realize that when you were writing that up? Were you careful about how you wrote it up?
Of course I was, but I didn't think something that simple and direct, except that I had it done as dialogue, so he was identified. And it was one of those mistakes you commit when you learn later that somebody pays a price for it. That, I mean, it would have utterly, I don't know what would have destroyed me if I'd been responsible for the man's death.